Hey everybody, and welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Early Muslim Expansion, Arab Conquest of Iran and Egypt Part 4. Last time we witnessed the Muslim conquest of Egypt and other areas of North Africa. It seems like in this part we are going to continue watching the expansion of the Caliphate. If you guys end up enjoying this reaction, I'd appreciate it if you would check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. And without any further ado, let's get into this video.
This was rejected, as the Caliph was worried about overextending his forces.
So we're starting off with our friend Amr ibn Alas asking once again to continue his conquest, though it seems like, at least for now, Umar's saying let's hold back a little. But I have no doubt that in the long term, the conquest will continue, the expansion will continue.
And this time, there was no loophole or clever ploy that Amr could use to bypass Umar's decree and continue his relentless campaigning. Therefore, after allowing his army to recuperate in Tripoli for a time, Amr travelled back to Fustat and remained there, quietly administering his Egyptian domain and dealing with whispers of future rebellion.
Wow. For once, he is forced to be a little more low-key, settle down, do some administration, not go straight into expanding the empire once again. Though, like I said, I'd be very surprised if we get through the rest of this video, or even the rest of this part, without any further expansion.
Although Umar had spared the rest of Byzantine Africa for the time being, that wouldn't last long.
Yep.
However, as the combat in North Africa was winding down, the situation on the Persian front was becoming heated again.
Interesting. Back to our Persian friends. Their empire has been seriously weakened. They've fled from some of the most important land of their empire, including Ctesiphon, their capital. I'm curious how this story is going to continue.
Sa'd's army was eager to pursue Yazdegerd across the mountains. However, Umar's refusal halted any further eastward expansion for the time being.
Right.
At the Caliph's command, Sa'd began combing Iraq for a place where he could establish a permanent military garrison. Eventually, after receiving guidance from the locals, Sa'd found a promising area of land in Siristan, where the land is both dry, well-watered, and is overgrown with thistles, and constructed a colony that would eventually grow into the city of Kufa. Far to the southeast, another Arab raiding force of 800, led by Utbah bin Ghazwan, began searching for a base of their own, and came across an arid area covered in rocks, and it was there that Utbah began work on a settlement which eventually developed into modern Basra. It seemed as though the frontier between the Caliphate and the Sassanid Empire would calcify at the Zagros Mountains, allowing Sa'd and Umar a brief time to consider administrative questions. However,
I mean, look, if you want to, run an empire, if you want to run an effective administration, it does mean that at times you have to take a brief pause from the conquest to focus on administration. And that seems like that's exactly what Umar is doing. I mean, he doesn't just want to keep continuously expanding. Well, maybe he does, but while he does that, he wants to also effectively administrate the territory he already has. So, I mean, that's pretty smart. I'm not familiar with this region, so when they say this would become this city or that would evolve into this modern city, it doesn't mean much to me, but clearly we're, seeing the beginning of some settlements that would later, be important in this area.
However, the post-Jalula status quo wouldn't last for long. Unwilling to accept the permanent loss of their Mesopotamian heartland due to haughty imperial pride, the Sassanids continued backing military action against the Caliphate, led by Hormuzan.
I mean, that's a pretty tough loss. You have lost your capital and your heartland. Your empire survives, but in a very weakened state. I mean, we talked about this when we saw the fall of Ctesiphon. I compared it to the Byzantines, and the comparison is quite different, actually, because if the Roman Empire was to lose Constantinople, it would pretty much be done. Their empire was extremely reliant on Constantinople surviving. Whereas the Sassanids, while of course Ctesiphon was important to them and that whole region was important to them, it clearly wasn't as crucial because their empire has managed to survive. But I can certainly see why they'd want to retake it. It is probably necessary for long-term survival on the scale of power that they'd held before. Of course, we know they'll never reach that level of influence, but they want to get back to that. That makes sense.
Head of one of Persia's premier families. During the retreat from Qadisiyah, Hormuzan had split off from the main column with his personal levy of survivors and marched back to his estates in Khuzestan. This territory formed a vulnerable bulge, being the only remaining imperial Sassanid territory west of the Zagros Mountains.
I mean, yeah, and not to mention something that you brought up there, not only is this land extremely important for the empire, but it's particularly important to the Sassanid court. I mean, we're talking about these nobles who, these are their holdings, this is their land, this is where they draw their power and influence from, and now they've lost all that and had to flee east over the mountains. So they've lost sort of their, base of power, and they want to get it back.
With little chance of resisting a concerted Muslim invasion of his lands, Hormuzan decided to go on the attack. From a forward base at the greatest city of his province, Awaz, the Persian general began launching quick raids into the area of Maysan in 638. As these attacks increased in frequency, Hormuzan established 2 additional bases even further west near Manazir. Utbah was unable to deal with the Persian attacks with his mere 800 troops and appealed to Sa'd for aid. In response, the commander-in-chief ordered Numan bin Mukarin with a few thousand warriors to bolster Utbah's strength. The combined Muslim force launched a lightning campaign that defeated Hormuzan's army in its forward bases and pushed the frontier east to the Karen River.
Yeah, I mean, nothing we haven't seen before in this front of the fighting. These sort of lightning campaigns waged by the Muslims against the Persians as they pushed them further back, and further back, defeating them in several successive battles. The Persians really cannot get a break.
Suitably chastened by the reverses his soldiers had suffered, the Persian general concluded an unstable peace with his 2 Muslim counterparts, claiming to submit to the caliph's suzerainty. The remainder of 638 passed without further warfare on the Persian front, except for a single act elsewhere, the so-called Fiasco of Fars. One of Sa'd's generals and governor of the uneventful province of Bahrain, Ullah bin al-Hadrami, sought to increase his own status and launched a reckless amphibious assault across the Persian Gulf. Landing on the coast of Fars, the Arab force headed towards Persepolis, managing to defeat a small militia in a costly battle before being surrounded and trapped by the Sassanids. The naval warfare despising caliph found out what Hadrami had done and was furious.
Yeah, we've already seen that Umar is not a fan of settlements around the water or naval warfare or anything of that sort. He's far more comfortable inland, and it makes sense given where he's from and where the empire began in the desert and spread outwards. But of course, with such a big empire, with so much expansion going on, so many powerful people, a lot of territory to grab, you're always going to have those powerful men who go rogue and try to claim, personal glory. Now, everybody's always trying to claim personal glory, but, if you're the caliph, as long as they do it in accordance with your orders, that's fine. Of course, this is an example of someone not following those orders, and so it becomes a problem, particularly if they fuck it up.
But nevertheless sent Utbah to rescue the beleaguered governor, after which he was dismissed from his position.
Fair.
Hormuzan used the respite granted by his truce with the Muslims to levy more soldiers, and in that time also received imperial reinforcements from Hulwan. Now reinforced, he took advantage of the treaty's unclear boundary terms as an excuse to reinitiate hostilities in early 639. The new governor of Basra, Abu Musa, was aware of his caliph's command to avoid taking any further Persian territory, So he wrote to Umar explaining the situation and asking for guidance. Umar responded with an order to take Awaz and stop Hormuzan's attacks.
I mean, look, as we've seen, something that is very much true for the Muslim forces is that the best defense is a good offense. So I think in order to wage successful warfare, they need to be able to go on offense, and Umar clearly realizes that. He's saying, yeah, I told you not to claim any more territory, but given the situation at hand, yeah, go ahead. Go forward, take this guy out, go on offense, because that's how they perform best.
This prompted Musa to march his forces to the river Karen and face off against the Persian lord across its breadth. Feeling confident about his chances, Hormuzan invited the Arab army across the river with the aim of facing and crushing it in a pitched battle.
Okay, well, it seems like a bad idea, given everything that's happened so far. I would definitely have tried to use your position across the river. Maybe force them into a crossing, or I don't know. But this is definitely very cocky. I guess we'll see if it pays off.
Musa gladly accepted, crossing by a bridge north of the city, defeating the Sassanid provincial force in a grueling fight and forcing Hormuzan into flight to Ram Hormuz.
Yeah, not really surprising that it went that way. If you're a Persian general in this situation, I'm not sure why you would just let them cross over and try to fight them head on. It's just not a good idea. Look at everything that's happened. I guess it was a sense of personal pride. But at this point, you think your pride might have been shaken a little bit. You might have a little bit of perspective. Maybe you've been humbled by the events of the past, but clearly not.
A typically aggressive pursuit force of Arab cavalry forced the overwhelmed Persian commander to retreat even further east. From a strong position behind yet another river, Hormuzan parleyed for peace with the Muslims, offering to recognize their conquest of Awaz while retaining a remnant of his own district. Still, the Sassanid reinforcements were pouring into northern Khuzestan in such large numbers that the preparations for another military campaign could no longer be kept secret. At this point, Sa'd was replaced as governor at Kufa by Ammar bin Yasir, who sent troops to Musa to subdue the Persian threat without delay.
Yeah, I wouldn't trust Hormuzan again. I mean, clearly he's preparing for a big campaign, or at least preparing to defend the rest of the empire. So no matter how many peace deals he makes with you, this guy's not to be trusted.
From Awaz, Musa launched his thrust against Hormuzan's forces at Ram Hormuz, defeated them in a brisk engagement, and subsequently captured most of eastern Khuzestan. Hormuzan retreated north to the Sassanid concentration point at Shushtar, a highly fortified, walled city in the Zagros foothills. Unsure about his ability to take on such a stronghold with his current strength, Musa had 1,000 fresh warriors sent to him from Kufa. With these additional warriors, Musa advanced north, captured Shushtar and Hormuzan along with it, followed relatively quickly by the truly ancient city of Susa. Returning to Basra after this victory, Musa sent a subordinate to capture the final garrison in Khuzestan. This was Junde Shapur, who succeeded by late 641. With the seizure of this final city, all of Khuzestan and Sassanid territory west of the Zagros was now under Muslim rule.
I honestly feel like at this point the Muslims could make their way across the Zagros Mountains and take the rest of the empire, though, no matter how easy it is to beat the Persians, that would still take a lot of resources and a lot of manpower, so, don't be too hasty with it, but I think they definitely could do it. Though, like I said, that would be a massive undertaking.
Despite the loss of Iraq, Sassanid Persia east of the Rocky Barrier was still a cohesive and powerful empire, with loyal territories as far off as India.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're, I kind of felt like the empire was very badly weakened following, the loss of that territory, but, seems like perhaps they still have some organization to them. I'm not sure how defensible the rest of the empire is or how much manpower they have. I mean, clearly they still have a lot of territory. I'm just not too familiar with what exactly, what that territory is worth, what the resources are, how many people are there, how defensible it is, etc., etc.
After the fall of Khuzestan to Musa's army, Yazdegerd dispatched urgent orders to all of his remaining provinces to raise troops and send them to Nahavand, a city on the primary transportation artery west. Throughout the later part of 641, contingents from cities across Iran and beyond, such as Isfahan, Ray and Hamadan, and many others, arrived at Nahavand, until at the turn of 642, an army of around 60,000 had come together.
I mean, that's a pretty impressive army. That's the sort of army that we've seen them muster before, but that, to be honest, after their pretty disastrous losses, I wasn't sure they could muster again. I didn't think they could bring that many men together. I mean, I'm sure there are that many troops across the empire, but the resources it takes to bring everyone to one place, it takes loyalty from your provincial governors. I didn't know if Yazdegerd was up to the challenge, but he's managed to bring together a pretty impressive fighting force. Can he use it to reclaim or at least defend the rest of his empire? I'm not so sure.
At the same time, this fearsome force was Yazdegerd's final chance to turn the war in his favor.
It seems like this guy has had many final chances. Every other month for Yazdegerd is another chance to save his empire. He hasn't succeeded yet, but I guess we'll see.
If he lost now, he would lose everything. A Sassanid general named Madan Shah was appointed to lead the army, who quickly warned the men that Umar is coming for you if you do not go for him. He has already destroyed the seat of your empire and plunged into the land of your emperor. A Persian frontier commander in service to the Caliphate noticed this massive military buildup and, alarmed, sent word to Ammar bin Yasir in Kufa, who immediately forwarded the information to Umar. Addressing the people of Medina on the issue, the Caliph's pronouncement that this is the day on which the future depends left no doubt as to the importance of the upcoming clash.
Alright.
The ever-active Caliph declared his intention to oversee the battle, but was talked out of it by his advisors, who pointed out that this was unnecessary. A more contentious issue was the assignment of military resources. Uthman wanted the whole army of the Caliphate concentrated, but Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali ibn Abi Talib, disagreed, reminding Uthman that depriving the other frontiers would just invite the Byzantines, Ethiopians and others to retake their old provinces.
Yeah, this is true. You have to think about the position you're in. You now have a very sizable empire of your own to take care of, and so you now have to make some of the same considerations that the Byzantines or the Sassanids have to make, which is, if you collect a bunch of troops and send them from across the empire to one region, that leaves the rest of your empire vulnerable to attack from your neighbors. These are the kind of things we've talked about the Byzantines and the Sassanids struggling with. Now the Caliphate is, not in the same place. It is a young, expanding, thriving empire, but it does have some of those concerns now that it is a massive geopolitical entity. Though, like I said, they're, expanding, thriving. I have no doubt they'll be able to deal with this challenge a lot better than the crumbling Sassanid Empire or, at this point, the very old Roman Empire.
Instead, he suggested the troops at Kufa, Basra, and along the Persian border form the core of a field army, supplemented by a fresh levy of raw recruits and veterans from Arabia.
Okay.
Umar concurred with Ali and gave command of the preemptive strike to the veteran of Qadisiyah and conqueror of Susa, Numan bin Muqarrin. Upon enthusiastically receiving the Caliph's decree, Numan assembled his troops, marched east from Kufa, and crossed the Tigris, rendezvousing with a number of other frontier units along the way. Trekking northeast from Ctesiphon along the Diyala River, the Muslims pivoted at Qasr Shirin and drove into the Zagros Mountains, eventually reaching a concentration point at Tazar in December 641. With 30,000 Muslim warriors assembled, Numan sent a scouting detachment into the Nahavand Valley to establish where exactly the Persians were. By nightfall it returned, having observed little to no sign of Sassanid activity in the rocky, uneven terrain between Tazar and the Persian base.
Interesting.
Numan immediately seized the opportunity and decamped, marching his entire army to a small town known as Isbizahan, just 10 miles northwest of Nahavand itself and its Persian occupants. When, not long after, Madan Shah learned that the invader was closing in, he responded by bringing the entirety of his own army out of the city. In preparation for the final battle, he deployed Sassanid Persia's great retribution field force in an L-shaped hook formation, wrapped around a high terrain feature known as the Brown Ridge. While his soldiers advantageously faced down the slope, Madan Shah himself took up a position atop the heights, where the Imperial commander had a brilliant view of the entire area.
I mean, it is good positioning. They're on the defense, so of course they've had the luxury to choose the battleground. It seems like they've chosen well. I'm interested to see where this goes. This is going to be a pretty large-scale battle. I mean, we've got a very sizable force of Persians and presumably Muslims as well. It seems like this is going to be a grand head-to-head battle. But yeah, good positioning from the Persians. We'll see if it helps them in the end. Can they pull out a W? So far, all of the major battles we've seen have been losses for them. Like Kings and Generals said, this is sort of their last chance to really save their empire. Or at least save that remnant of power they once had. Will the Sassanids be able to do it? I don't have much faith, because we've seen them take loss after loss, but anything could happen, I suppose.
This adroitly selected defensive position had multiple terrain features amplifying its strength. In front of the Sassanid line was a small stream, along the bank of which Madan Shah placed a minefield of cavalry crippling caltrops. Furthermore, his right, the short edge of the reverse L formation, was anchored on a fortified village and the 3,000-foot-high Ardashan Ridge, while the longer southeast-facing left flank was protected by a fork in the stream.
It is a good position, though.
Confronted by this natural fortress, and with few other options, Numan drew up his warriors along Madan Shah's entire front, just across the stream and facing up the slope. The Muslim general's brother, Nuaym, led the L's short section. Hudayfa bin al-Yaman commanded the right, and Kaka bin Amr headed the Caliphate's cavalry reserve. Numan himself was in the center. The Caliphate's deployment gave Madan Shah a potential opportunity to launch a preemptive assault at the unprepared Muslim lines. However, either due to overconfidence in his prepared fortifications, or cautious of leaving them due to the previous defeat at Jalula, the Empire's field commander remained where he was.
Yeah, that's a difficult spot. I do see the dilemma. I mean, it's always good to seize the opportunity and take a strike at your enemy if you're able to. But I do also understand the thinking that, well, we've chosen the location. We have these fantastic defenses. I don't want to potentially risk that by sending a bunch of my men out to go fight the Muslims. So that is a tricky situation.
Allowing Numan to finish bringing his forces up. This inaction likely did not seem like a blunder. The Muslims were far away from their bases in Iraq, and could either smash their heads against the dangerous Persian fortifications, or wait, chew through their supplies, and retreat in deadly conditions.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how this is going to go. I mean, we know the Caliphate's forces are capable of a victory because they pulled out extremely impressive victories before, but looking at the battlefield right now, I'm honestly not sure how they would do it. They're in a far worse position. They're far away from their home base, so they have far worse supply lines. So like they said, I'm not sure what sort of move they're going to pull to win this battle. If they do, I'm kind of assuming they will. I guess we'll have to see.
An hour after the Islamic noon prayer, as the sun reached its highest point in the sky, the entire Muslim army began its attack straight at Madan Shah's defensive belt.
All right,
Upon
straight
reaching
on.
the Wadi stream, The attackers' infantry and cavalry alike were met with a deadly rain of Persian arrows, loosed by archers who had the luxury of shooting downhill. Worse still, Kaka's horsemen galloped headlong into the caltrops, leading to the maiming and immobilization of many horses. Nevertheless, Numan's men pushed on across the entire front, weakened all the way by arrow fire. Then, charging uphill, the Muslims crashed into the Sassanid ranks, and the two sides met in ferocious melee combat. A grinding clash of attrition began with little room for flair or tactical brilliance, only numerical weight, personal prowess, strength, and discipline. On some sections of the line, perhaps those under Nuaim's command, where the slope was more gradual, the Muslims managed to temporarily push Madan Shah's soldiers back, but each time were counterattacked and shoved to their original positions by the Persians. In other areas, near Zaramin, where the slope was steepest, the Persians even managed to haul the Caliphate's forces back across the wadi, but they in turn counterattacked and fought back to where they were. The battle's outcome rested on a knife edge, with dead and dying of both sides littering the field.
I mean, it seems like this is just a straight-up slugfest. We're not getting any intelligent, strategic, or tactical moves, at least so far. I wasn't sure what the Muslim forces were going to do because, the Persians had a pretty strong defensive position. They just went for it. And now it's, just man-on-man melee combat. So whoever can hold out the longest, whoever has better training, is more ferocious, is going to win this battle.
Either laying still or shouting in terrible agony. This mass slaying continued until nightfall, when the Muslims, with no prospect of breaking the Persian line that night, pulled away and withdrew to their camp.
Okay.
The night hours passed without contact, with both sides recovering their fallen comrades and tending to the wounded. When dawn...
Live to fight another day. For a second there, it kind of seemed like the battle was going to be decided on that first day when they were talking about it was on a knife edge. They were going back and forth. But, of course, in a massive slugfest battle like this, as we've seen before at Al-Qadisiyah or Yarmouk, this is a several-day affair. It's going to take
broke on the second day, however. Numan formed his army up and, somewhat inexplicably, launched another frontal assault across the stream, lasting all day. After what historian Akram poetically described as a tragic harvest of death, the Muslims again retreated, unsuccessful and badly bloodied.
Yeah, not great. Not going super great for the Muslims so far.
Both armies formed up again at dawn on the third day, but a mixture of the horror, tactical sanity, and possible mutiny kept the Muslim general from attempting his human wave assault for a third time. Instead,
the strategy of just throw your men into the fire, throw them into the meat grinder, and hope they can pull out a victory is sometimes works, but is often not the best solution. One, the massive human cost and tragedy, and two, it's not bringing them any success here. They're going to have to do something different, and we've seen that before in these battles, in these head-on-head battles. Oftentimes, it's not just, that the Muslim forces could win in this absolute slugfest, though sometimes they can, but, it's what else do they think of? Can they sneak into the city? Can they send their cavalry on for a flanking maneuver? Can they think of something different? Can they use, tactics that'll surprise their enemies and bring them the victory? That seems like what they're going to have to do here.
He waited for the Persians to emerge from their fortifications and launch an attack of their own. But Madan Shah was a wily commander, aware that time was his champion, and refused to budge.
Very wise.
After a tense 2-day standoff, the Sassanid regimental commanders began raiding the Muslim line with small contingents. These limited attacks would inflict damage on personnel and supplies, before swiftly pulling back behind their defenses, leaving the Islamic forces frustrated. While constant assailment and the cold conditions struck blow after blow to Muslim morale and strength, Madan Shah began absorbing a steady stream of reinforcements and provisions from nearby Hamadan. The situation could not continue as it stood. and so Numan called a council of war only a few days after his previous attack. The eldest companion present advised that the Muslims ought not to attack at all, and to merely destroy those raiding parties which came to attack them. As all the officers were eager to get stuck in properly, this proposal was met with disapproval. Another more gung-ho leader suggested that the frontal attacks actually be resumed, regardless of consequence. This too was quickly shot down. Then,
man, they're really thinking it out, struggling to find what to do. I mean, you know, so far it's really not going well for the Muslim forces. They are seemingly at a major disadvantage. You know, they've been losing a lot more troops than the Sassanids. What I will say is that we have seen this before. We've seen them, you know, at Yarmouk. They did struggle at the beginning before bringing it back, finding how exactly to beat the Romans. They could do the same thing here. They're struggling right now, but, you know, even in a major battle like this, it takes one tactical victory to beat your enemy. If you can just get one good flanking maneuver, or, you know, one surprise attack in, it doesn't take much to fold the other army. It really doesn't.
Spoke Taleha bin Kulawayd, a former enemy of Islam and one of the architects of Jalula, who put forward a clever stratagem. The Muslims, he said, should put the cavalry in a position to outflank them and show a weak front, making as if to withdraw. Let the Persians hope for victory and advance against us. Then we turn and fight them. This plan was approved by most of those present and put into motion.
A classic bit of trickery. You know, this has been used many times throughout the years. You know, probably since we haven't had recorded history, it's a pretty simple tactic. You know, make our forces, our center, look weak, have the enemy advance, and then, you know, we stop running away, or we hold the line and we pounce on them. You know, it's a good way to, if your enemy has a strong defensive position, which they do, you need to move them from that defensive position. So you need to pretend like you're weakened, and give them the idea that now's our chance. Now we're going to run and strike against the Muslim forces, and then you spring your attack. Like I said, classic, pretty simple, but it works. That's why it's continuously used throughout history.
With the purpose of making the illusion of weakness more convincing, at Taleha's proposal, the Muslims also began circulating false rumors that Caliph Umar was dead.
Smart.
Over the next few days, word of Umar's death proliferated around the overjoyed Persian army like a kind of virulent mental plague, provoking hopes of an offensive against their now surely demoralized enemy. The Friday after Numan's last attack, Sassanid sentries began observing the abandonment of Muslim positions across the stream, tents being pulled down in the...
Like I said, you know, a classic feigned retreat. It's a pretty simple strategy, but, you know, it can be very difficult to pull off, especially with such a large force. I mean, there's a lot of coordination that has to happen to get everybody to, you know, retreat in an orderly but convincing fashion at the same time. And then, you know, the organizational difficulty particularly comes in getting everybody to turn around and then stand and fight instead of continuing to run away. That's why sometimes feigned retreats can just turn into real retreats, because you cannot manage to organize your forces to spin around and fight at once. Or, you know, they're already running away from their enemies. In this case, a superior force. Sometimes fear grabs hold and they just keep running. So, you know, I guess we'll see how this feigned retreat is executed, but it seems like they have a very good plan in place.
Muslim camp, baggage being loaded, and small contingents of men marching west. Everything Ma'dan Shah could see appeared to suggest that the invading army was vulnerable and was about to retreat.
Nice.
So the general opened a series of gaps in the Caltrip belt on his right flank, according to a pre-prepared plan, and began having his soldiers cross to the outside. Lead elements halted just beyond the Caltrip field.
And this is probably even more effective because in the battle up until this point, the Muslim and the Persian forces have clashed, and it seems like the Persians have come out ahead. You know, they've been seeing victory so far, and so their confidence is already up. Then you add, you know, the whole ruse about Umar dying. And then you showed the Muslim forces retreating, so the Persians' confidence is at an all-time high. That's just going to, make them believe this feigned retreat even more. They're not going to question it because, they already believe that they're defeating the enemy. And so, of course, they're retreating. Makes sense.
Waiting for the rear ranks and began forming up there. According to our sources, Maden Shah might have restored the Caltrip field so his troops could not run.
Tough.
The retreating Muslim infantry span around upon seeing that they were about to be struck from behind and hastily deployed for battle, somewhat further back than before. Of course, this was all part of Taleha's plan. The Persian general had swallowed the bait, hook, line and sinker.
Yep.
Unbeknownst to the Sassanid army, Kaka and his cavalrymen were concealed in a gap behind the Ardashan ridge, ready to attack.
A feigned retreat and a cavalry flanking maneuver. They just some, tactics that we have seen before in this series. The forces of the Caliphate, they love a good cavalry flanking maneuver. And fair enough, because it usually works. I mean, they've got a very strong cavalry. A lot of the troops of the Caliphate are Arab tribesmen. I mean, now they're expanding, and there's, lots of different people joining their army, such as, they have Persians in the Caliphate's forces now, but the base is still these Arab tribesmen, cavalrymen, and so this is what they're best at, and this is why we see repeated usage of this strategy, because it works for them.
2 hours before noon, Maden Shah ordered his army to advance slowly towards the stationary enemy line. When the Persians entered missile range, they began loosing arrow volleys, with the aim of softening the Muslims up at a greater range than Arab bows could operate at. Forced to defend themselves with only their shields, many of the Caliphate's warriors were chomping at the bit to close with the Sassanids and fight them in melee, but Numan, with a wider view of the strategic situation, ordered them to remain steady.
And this is why this sort of thing can be difficult. We talked about the difficulty of organizing a feigned retreat, but this difficulty can extend to any part of the battle. You've got thousands, tens of thousands of men chomping at the bit, ready to run across that field and start fighting the Persians, and you have to keep them in line. You have to make sure that they don't advance, because as a commander, you can see the entire field, and you also know the plan. You have a broader view of what's going on. And so you have to tell your troops, don't advance, hold strong, stay where you are, which to them might seem like a pretty bad decision, considering you're being pelted with missiles and arrow fire, but you know what has to happen. That can be tough to organize and tough to enforce. You need discipline and loyalty from your men, which, the Caliphate's forces clearly have.
After a while weakening the Muslims with missile fire, Maden Shah launched a full-on charge. This was the key moment of the battle, as this attack finally unanchored the Imperial right flank from the Ardashan ridge and its nearby fortified village. Remaining on the defensive, Numan restrained his forces from effectively pushing back, withdrawing slowly in a similar manner to Hannibal's center at Cannae. Then, after some time of suffering this, Numan ordered a counterattack just after midday, and at the same time, Kaka's cavalry swept out from behind the ridge and drove a wedge between the Persians and their obstacles.
Smart.
However, Maden Shah detached a unit of reserves that met and held the Muslim cavalry before the encirclement was completed. On the front line, Persian forces were gradually pushed back under the weight of Numan's counterattack.
Okay, see, now the Persians are in a really bad position. It's gone from extremely favorable to them with their, very well selected defensive position to this. They are now basically being surrounded. They're flanked. That just shows you how effective this feigned retreat flanking strategy was. It's completely moved the Persian army and put them into a terrible position. Though at this point, it does seem like they're still fighting back. They're fighting ferociously, but they are slowly being pushed.
But then, the Muslim general was struck by an arrow, fell from his horse, and
wow.
was spirited away from the fight, with
Not good.
Mu'im impersonating him to maintain morale. Although Sassanid resistance was absolutely unwavering, by late afternoon, the Muslim forces, half encircling their foe, were clearly in the superior position. Suddenly, as the sky began to darken, the majority of Madan Shah's army collapsed and routed, able to do so because the forces opposing Kaka were still resisting. Amidst this chaos, Taleha was also slain. A relatively large number of Persian troops managed to escape the battlefield, but many, including Madan Shah, were killed by their Muslim pursuers, fell victim to the re-strengthened Caltrop belt, or were taken prisoner. Hudayfa took command of the Caliphate's army after Numan's death, and advanced the following morning, defeating the Sassanid remnant at Darazid. Part of the defeated army retreated into Nahavand itself after the second defeat, where the new imperial commander, Dinar, surrendered the city unconditionally. Nahavand was the final great battle between Islam and Persia, marking the point at which there was no longer any doubt. The Sassanid Empire would fall. For this, Nahavand is known to the Muslims as the victory of victories. It would take another decade to subdue all of the far-flung Persian territories in Central Asia and Eastern Iran, but by late 644, as author Peter Crawford states, Yazdegerd III was effectively a king without a kingdom.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this pretty much from the beginning of the series, when the Sassanids started taking these massive losses to the Muslims. It kind of looked like their empire was on the verge of destruction. Their empire has been ready to crumble for a while now, and it has really been dangling off a cliff. And finally, their fingers have been stomped on. They've fallen. The empire's done. It's interesting. There are these massive battles to take Ctesiphon, and this massive battle we just saw. And then now you have Yazdegerd, who is, emperor of nothing, basically. He'll continue for a couple more years, but he's really got nothing left. And, there's the fall of the Persian Empire, the Sassanid Empire. How about that? We all knew it was coming. You could see the writing on the wall for a while now, but this is a pretty impressive victory for the Caliphate. I mean, we've seen a lot of impressive victories before, but in terms of a whole campaign, this is extremely successful. I mean, they've managed to conquer one of the two most powerful empires in this region. You've got the Romans and the Persians. They have been there for a long time, and they've been the two rivals. And now this new upstart empire, which has not existed for that long, the Rashidun Caliphate, has just defeated one of those two major rivals. Now, of course, the Roman Empire will survive for hundreds, almost 1,000 years after this, so they've still got a long time to go, though their power will decline over those hundreds and hundreds of years. But the Sassanids, that did not take long, a couple of years, and they're gone. That just shows you sort of the power and the momentum of the early caliphate. How quickly they were expanding, how much power they had behind them, the influence they had over the region. It's really quite remarkable, honestly. And of course, we've seen that throughout this whole series, but this is definitely an important marker in that journey.
In late 643, shortly after Ammar returned from his expedition against the so-called Pentapolis, the Egyptian governor travelled back to Medina in order to meet with Umar, with whom he already had a somewhat tense relationship.
Yeah, I can tell.
Mistrusted by the Caliph, Ammar received...
To be fair, Ammar did kind of trick him with the conquest of Egypt. I mean, he basically knew that Umar didn't want to do it at that time, and I guess he didn't technically go against Umar's orders, but, he went around them in a way that, he was basically disobeying the Caliph and, pulling these tricks to get his own way. Ammar wants to constantly expand, and, Umar he's clearly cool with expansion, but he also wants to consolidate the gains that have been made and set up effective administration in these new territories. So it is clear that there is a bit of tension between the two.
A frosty reception from the very start. The tension between the two men wasn't helped by the fact that Umar, who always kept a close eye on his governors via an internal spy network, suspected Ammar of unjustly appropriating Egypt's wealth. So, when the latter returned to his province, the Caliph dispatched a trusted inspector, Muhammad bin Maslama, to appraise Ammar's assets. The latter produced an account of his assets, and he was found guilty of taking too much.
Wow.
The excess was confiscated and taken back to Medina.
Yeah, Umar's pretty strict with his subordinates. He's really a micromanager. I mean, there's a spectrum if you're an emperor of a big empire. There's, on one end, there's complete micromanagement. You want to do everything yourself. And then, on the other hand, there's a complete offhand approach. Hands-off approach, I should say. Emperors who basically don't do anything to govern their empire. Umar is, very strongly in the micromanaging category. He keeps a close eye on his governors. He sends them specific instructions. He's not afraid to demote them or prosecute them for corruption or not following orders. So, he keeps an eye on things, clearly.
That wasn't the end of the Caliph's incessant prodding. A short while thereafter, unsatisfied at the lackluster revenues flowing into the treasury from Egypt, Umar had a heated debate with Ammar by letter. After that ended in a deadlock, a Copt was sent to Medina to inform the Caliph of his province's financial situation. He bluntly informed Umar that previous rulers of Egypt had seen to the land's prosperity before taking anything from it, while Muslim governors only extracted.
Damn.
In response, Umar carved
Bold.
Egypt into two separate administrative districts during late 644, giving Ammar Lower Egypt to govern from Fustat, while Upper Egypt would be ruled from Fayum by Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sa'd, the foster brother of Uthman. Predictably, Ammar was once again infuriated at this deliberate diminishing of his authority.
I'm sure.
Back
Well, if it was up to Ammar, he would have just continued west throughout North Africa. He'd probably be in Spain at this point. I know the Caliphate will eventually reach that far, but if it was up to Ammar, he'd probably be there already. So I'm sure he's extremely frustrated at Umar trying to decrease his level of influence over the region that he conquered.
in Medina, a deadly plot had formed, centering around Hormuzan, who had converted to Islam and used his vast experience in Sassanid administration and governance to become one of Umar's key advisors.
Interesting. There are a lot of, or at least it seems like there are a lot of pretty important Persians who have basically just jumped ship. They looked at the Sassanid Empire and they said, well, that is crumbling, it's going to fall. I'm going to convert to Islam and join, the new rising empire. And they've taken up pretty important positions in the new caliphate. It seems like, if they convert and, prove their loyalty, that those positions, at the top of the military and the government are pretty open to them, which is, it's interesting.
Despite this, the Persian noble never forgot the injury done to his home. It seems that Hormuzan made contact with Firuz, a Sassanid soldier who was enslaved after Qadisiyah or Nahavand and brought to the caliphate's capital. And in November of 644, Firuz knifed Umar.
Wow.
Before passing away 3 days after, the second caliph appointed a shura, or council of 6 men, to appoint his successor from among their ranks.
Wow.
After deep debate, they decided that Uthman would become the third Rashidun caliph. It is worth noting that while Sunni Islam views Uthman as one of the rightly guided caliphs, Shia Muslims believe this election should not have occurred at all, and Ali was to be the next in line.
Yeah, this is where we get to the split between Sunni and Shia Muslims. There is, I guess, beef between the two, you could call it. If by beef you mean centuries-long debate, warfare, hatred, they are, really not fans of each other. That is, for those that don't know, if you're not familiar with Islam, that is a big dividing line between those two sects of Islam. They really do not like each other. Speaking generally, there's some big disagreements going on. Though it is interesting that, this is how the next caliph was decided, this sort of council where they debated and then collectively made the decision. It is a pretty calm way to decide on the next emperor for your empire. A pretty steady succession, at least compared to the other empires of the time.
Shortly after, Amr ibn Alas visited Uthman in order to lobby for his Upper Egyptian colleague's removal. The new caliph refused outright, prompting him to declare that he wouldn't return to Egypt until Abdullah ibn Sa'd was removed. In response to this threat, Uthman appointed his foster brother governor of all Egypt, further deepening the dispute between the two men.
Yeah.
The Romans...
Amr appears to be digging himself into a deeper and deeper hole. He has tension with the caliph, then his holdings are split and he gets half. He comes back, complains some more, and now he's not governor of any part of Egypt. That role has been taken from him. So it's not going super well for him at the moment.
In Egypt were not happy with Amr's policies, but Abdullah's attempts to increase the incomes from the province were even less popular. Alexandria in particular bore the brunt of this new lust for revenue, leading its notoriously riotous population to undertake drastic measures. A group of prominent Romans dispatched messages to the new emperor, Constans II. These letters outlined the outrages of Muslim rule and its jizya tax, but also pointed out that Abdullah had let the Nile realm's defense slip into a pitiful state.
Yeah, citizens of cities like Alexandria or Constantinople are pretty, I guess, entitled, you could call it. And I mean, fair enough, they live in the center of power. And say if you're a citizen of Constantinople, if the emperor is doing stuff that you don't like, well, you can all get together, riot, and get him kicked out or murder the guy. I think that's true for Alexandria, another, important city in the region. They hold a lot of influence, a lot of religious influence, and so if something is happening in the entire region that they don't like, they can get together, riot, and try to change it, because they live in the center of power, Alexandria, and so they're just, they're doing what they usually do, riot and protest.
And the city was only garrisoned by a paltry 1,000 men and could be easily taken.
Wow.
Perceiving an opportunity to regain control of Egypt and remedy the wound which its loss had dealt to his empire and his pride, Constans began secretly amassing a great strike force of 300 ships and many thousands of soldiers, command of which he bestowed on a eunuch known as Manuel.
Interesting.
Constance's fleet was ready after almost a year. Because the reduced Byzantine Empire was still the dominant naval power in the Mediterranean, the Caliphate having not yet developed any seaborne capacity, there was nothing to stop this fleet from unexpectedly sailing straight into the harbour at Alexandria in early 646.
And this is what we talked about before. I mean, the Byzantines have been very much weakened, but they still control the Mediterranean navally. And, the Muslims have captured a lot of port cities in North Africa, and that's part of an attempt to build naval power, but they haven't really got there yet. And so, considering that if you look at this entire region, a lot of the important cities are coastal, because if you go inland, it gets, there's desert, right? And so those are less populated areas. And so being the dominant naval power in that region can give you a lot of influence. And, the Romans, they would lose a lot of territory over the years, but They weren't ones to just give up on territory they'd lost. You know, you can look at Justinian, for example. So they still want to reclaim their lost territory and return their empire to its former glory. You know, it's never going to happen. They're increasingly going to lose more territory as time goes on, even though there are ups and downs. But, you know, they will keep trying. They will keep trying.
As the Roman sympathizers predicted, the 1,000-strong Muslim garrison was no adequate defense against this shock assault from the sea. When Roman forces landed almost unopposed, Alexandria's population simultaneously rose up against the occupying Arabs. Most of the city's garrison was slain in the brief clash that followed. However, while the invasion army began ravaging the vicinity around Alexandria, some of the Muslims that escaped traveled to Fustat and informed the governor what was happening. Abdullah ibn Sa'd didn't even have a chance to react. Lacking confidence in their new viceroy's martial ability, the Muslims of Egypt sent a delegation to Caliph Uthman, urging him to send Amr back so that he could put an end to the crisis.
Wow.
Understanding that Amr was both a man of formidable military talent and feared by the Romans, Uthman bit his tongue and asked Amr to take his post back.
All right, and that's where we're going to end it, with the return of Amr to Egypt. He conquered it. Will he be able to save it, take it back from the Romans? Well, y'all have to wait until next time to see that. This was a good one. I enjoyed this one. I didn't really talk about it because we kind of moved past it very quickly, but we saw the death of Umar. It was a really, quick and kind of underrated death. He was stabbed, gone, onto Uthman. You know, we elected the next caliph. I think it kind of got overshadowed because we then immediately went to the split between Sunni and Shia Islam, and that's, of course, an extremely important topic. So we kind of went straight to that, but, we saw the demise of Umar. He was, I think, a very successful caliph. He presided over a time of, vast expansion. Ever since the empire was born, it's been a time of vast expansion. But he was also careful to handle administration in those new territories he had conquered. He wanted to make sure that, while they were expanding, they were also improving administration across the empire and setting up governance in new territories instead of just leaving them to continue. I mean, that's what Amr wanted to do. He wanted to just continue conquest, forget about administration. But Umar made sure to kind of temper that instinct, both in the west and the east. He restrained further conquest of the Sassanid Empire, though they ended up defeating the Sassanids anyway. So he was definitely one of those micromanaging emperors, but he seems to have been good at it. Micromanaging emperor, there are pros and cons, but it's only really bad when the emperor doesn't know what he's doing. Umar seems like he was a pretty competent guy. It seems like he had a lot of successes. And we've seen him gone. That's another really prominent figure from this series that is now gone. So yeah, there we go. This was an interesting one. We saw a lot of good stuff. We got one more part to go. I'm curious to see how this ends. Of course, we're going to continue the series past this. But the next part, part 5, will be the end of this, monster 2.5-hour Arab conquest of Iran and Egypt episode. I've been enjoying this really a lot so far. If you guys like this one, I'd appreciate it if you would check out the Patreon, which is linked down below. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video. I hope you guys are all having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.